To make your Olga cardigan, you'll need to cut out one back piece cut on the fold. You'll also need to cut out 2 front pieces, and these are just mirror images of each other. Next, you'll need 2 sleeve cuffs. These are just rectangle pieces. You're also going to need to cut out 2 cropped button stands, and you're going to have to interface 1/2 of each of the button stands. So just like you see here, I interfaced half of that on the wrong side of the fabric. And you'll also of course need to cut out 2 sleeves. The very first step is to pin the front to the back at the shoulder seams. So just take your front panels and pin them along the shoulder seams of the back. Once you pin that in place, go ahead and take it to your sewing machine, and you're going to sew with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once you finish sewing both seams, you can press it open or you can serge the seam and press it towards the back. Now it's time to attach our sleeves. Pin the center notch of the sleeve to the shoulder seam with right sides together. Continue pinning, matching the front and back sleeve notches with the corresponding notches on your arm's eye. Next, we'll go ahead and pin our button stands together with right sides facing along one short end. Next, go ahead and fold one sleeve cuff onto itself with right sides together, and you're going to pin along the short end. Repeat that to your remaining sleeve cuff. Go ahead and take your fabric to your sewing machine, and we're going to start with our button stand. Go ahead and sew along the short end that you pinned. Press the seam open. Next, sew each sleeve cuff along the short end. Sew your sleeves in place with a zigzag stitch, making sure to remove your pins as you go, using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once you've sewn both sleeves in place, go ahead and neaten the seam with a serger or your desired method. Now we're just going to fold our front to our back with right sides facing, and we're going to pin along both side seams, starting at the bottom and working our way up towards the bottom of the sleeve. Go ahead and take your cardigan to your sewing machine and sew with 1/2 inch seam allowance along both side seams, making sure to remove those pins as you go. Before we attach our button stand, we have to finish the hem of the cardigan. So press the hem to the wrong side by 1 inch, and you're going to sew very close to your serged edge. Press the hem to neaten. Next, we're going to pin the interface side of the button stand to the cardigan along the neckline and the front edges. So go ahead and pin first, starting at the center back of the cardigan. Next, you're going to pin 1/2 inch beyond the hem of the cardigan. So 1/2 inch of the button stand extends past the cardigan. Pin there, and then you're just going to continue pinning throughout the entire button stand and front edges. Take your cardigan to your sewing machine, and we're going to sew the button stand to the front edges with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Next, just trim the seam allowance down to about 1/4 inch. So take half of that seam allowance away. Next, fold the button stand onto itself with right sides together along the fold line. You're going to stitch along the short end that extended by 1/2 inch. Next, we'll go ahead and attach our sleeve cuffs. Grab your sleeve cuff and press the seam open. Then you're going to fold the seam onto itself with wrong sides together. Next, go ahead and slip the sleeve cuff over the sleeve with right sides together. Pin matching the seam of the sleeve cuff to the seam of the sleeve. First, we'll finish the hem of our button stand. So sew along the short edge that extended by 1/2 inch. Sew right up along the hem. Snip that away and then press the button stand to the wrong side. Next, go ahead and sew your sleeve cuff with 1/2 inch seam allowance. It helps if you sew starting from the inside of the sleeve. Now we need to finish the inside of the button stand. Press the folded edge of the button stand to the inside along the seam line. Pin the button stand in place along the right side of the fabric. Continue pressing the folded edge along the seam line and pinning in place throughout the entire button stand. Next, you're going to stitch in the ditch of the button stand. Go ahead and refer to your sewing instruction booklet if you do not know what stitch in the ditch is. Essentially, you're just stitching within the seam line, making sure to catch the underside of the button stand while you sew. It's time to attach our buttons to the front of our cardigan, so go ahead and grab 3 3/4 inch buttons. Refer to your specific sewing machine manual for directions on inserting a buttonhole with your fabric. I suggest testing your buttonhole on a scrap piece of fabric before you sew on your actual cardigan. I like to use strips of tearaway stabilizer to help me insert my buttons. I'll go ahead and link some in the description bar below. From the top of one buttonhole, I spaced 3 inches between the bottom of the next buttonhole, so each of my buttonholes are 3 inches apart. Next, you need to open your buttonholes. I place a pin at the top of the buttonhole and a pin along the bottom. Then I grab my seam ripper and I open the buttonhole, making sure not to cut past the pins. Repeat this step to your remaining 2 buttonholes. The buttonholes are on the right side of the cardigan, so now we need to attach the buttons to the left side of the cardigan. So go ahead and place a pin through your buttonhole with your cardigan laying flat. This is going to mark where you need to sew your button. Once you've marked your place, go ahead and hand sew your 3/4 inch button onto your cardigan. Repeat this step to your remaining 2 buttons and buttonholes. Alright you guys, once you've sewn your buttons in place, you're all done with your Olga cardigan. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and I will see you in my next one. Bye guys!